Hey everyone, I'm willing to bet that you requested this deep dive because you've seen the swastika and thought, hold on, what is the history of this symbol?
Yeah, it's certainly a symbol that tends to raise a lot of
Yeah,
questions.
for sure. So to get some answers, we've been looking into historical texts, archaeological findings, religious studies.
Mm.
We're going to trace the swastika's journey from its ancient origins
Well,
all the way to the controversy that surrounds it today.
right.
And let me tell you, there's a lot more to this symbol than initially meets the eye.
There really is. A lot of people are surprised when they find out that the swastika has been around for thousands of years, long before it was ever associated with the Nazi Party.
Okay, so let's start with those ancient origins. I was reading about this bird figurine that was carved from mammoth ivory,
Wow.
and it had a swastika on it. And get this, it dates back to 10,000 BCE.
That's incredible. That's actually the oldest swastika that we've discovered so far.
Oh, wow.
It just goes to show how deeply rooted this symbol is in human history. And it's even more fascinating because the swastika appears in the Venus symbols, which actually predate formal writing systems. Basically, they were early emojis that people used to communicate ideas.
Really emojis, I love that.
Mm.
Okay, so we've got Ukraine, we've got the Vinja culture. Where else does the swastika pop up in the ancient world?
Oh, it's kind of scattered all over Eurasia. We're talking the Indus Valley civilization, ancient Armenia, Iron Age Europe.
Wow.
And here's the thing. It appears in both clockwise and counterclockwise orientations.
Okay.
So imagine the arms of the swastika spinning like a windmill.
Okay.
If they're moving to the right, that's the clockwise version.
Okay.
And that's often linked to the sun or the movement of the heavens.
Okay, and if it's spinning to the left?
That's counterclockwise. And sometimes that's called the swastika.
The savastika.
Yeah, the swastika. And that one was associated with concepts like night or even with powerful goddesses in certain traditions.
So even back then, the direction that the swastika was facing really mattered. I'm curious, were people using it just to represent the sun and the night? Or were there other ideas tied to it?
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't just celestial objects. There are theories that link it to the North Celestial Pole, which is that point around which all the stars seem to rotate. Some even connected to comets blazing across the sky, leaving kind of a four-pronged tail.
Wow.
And then you have the idea of the four winds, which are essential forces of nature.
So we've got astronomy, mythology, natural forces, like all woven into this one symbol.
Exactly.
It sounds like the swastika was really important to these ancient cultures, but did it always have a positive meaning?
It's really hard to say definitively, you know, but in most of these early contexts, the swastika was associated with positive concepts.
Okay.
Think well-being, luck, prosperity, life itself. And in fact, the word swastika comes from the Sanskrit word svastika, which means conducive to well-being.
Wow, well-being. It's so different from what we tend to think of today when we see the swastika.
I know, it really highlights how much a symbol's meaning can change over time.
Right.
Speaking of change, let's move on to the swastika's role in Asian religions.
Okay.
Even today, it's a pretty common sight in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism.
Right. I've definitely seen the swastika on temples, on statues in those traditions. So how did it become so important in these religions?
Well, in Hinduism, the clockwise swastika is very closely linked to the sun god Surya. It's seen on homes, businesses, temples. It's often placed at entrances as a symbol of good luck or a blessing.
So it's kind of like a prayer for good fortune woven into daily life.
Yeah, exactly.
What about Buddhism? What does the swastika represent there?
For Buddhists, the swastika often symbolizes the Buddha's footprints, marking the path to enlightenment. You'll frequently see it on statues or images of the Buddha.
Footprints. That's such a beautiful image. So is that the main one that you see in Buddhism, the clockwise version?
Yes, but the counterclockwise svastika also appears, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. And both orientations represent positive aspects of the Buddhist teachings.
It's fascinating how one symbol can have so many different meanings, even in the same region.
It really is. And in Jainism, the swastika represents the seventh Tirthankara, which is a spiritual teacher named Suparshivanatha. And it symbolizes the four realms of existence where a soul can be reborn before achieving liberation.
So that kind of connects back to the ideas of life and rebirth, the eternal cycle of existence.
Exactly. The swastika's meaning in these Asian religions shows how a symbol can be deeply woven into a culture's spiritual understanding of the world.
Now, I know we're jumping continents here, but the swastika also appears in Europe before the 20th century. It's not as common as in Asia, but it's there.
Right.
What's the story with the swastika in Europe?
Well, it pops up in some pretty interesting places. We see it in ancient Greece, Rome, and then later on in Romanesque and Gothic architecture. And what's interesting is that in these contexts, it's less about spirituality and more about mechanics.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
think about the turning of a windmill or a water wheel. Perpetual motion.
So more of a practical or technological association.
Yeah, precisely. We even see it on medieval churches and on objects that were found in Anglo-Saxon graves.
Okay, so it wasn't completely foreign to Europe before the 20th century.
Right.
But then there's Heinrich Schliemann, the archaeologist who excavated Troy.
All right.
I've heard his name before, but what does he have to do with the swastika?
Well, Schliemann found swastikas during his excavations and, based on the research at the time, linked them to ancient Aryan culture. And his findings kind of contributed to the swastika's growing popularity in Europe during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But unfortunately, this popularity would have unforeseen and devastating consequences.
Right, because this is where the swastika takes a dark turn.
Yes.
This is where the Nazi Party enters the picture.
Yes. And it's a chilling example of how a symbol with such a long and diverse history can be twisted and manipulated to serve a hateful ideology.
It's almost unbelievable how they could take something so positive and turn it into something so hateful. So how did this happen? What drew the Nazi Party to the swastika in the first place?
Well, remember how we were talking about the swastika gaining popularity in Europe during the late 19th and early 20th centuries?
Right, with Schliemann's findings and that whole idea of Aryan heritage.
Exactly. So the Nazi Party, with their ideology of racial purity and this nationalistic fervor, they saw the swastika as like a really powerful symbol to kind of rally people to their cause.
Wow.
And so they formally adopted it in 1920.
It's just wild how they could take something so positive and twist it into something so hateful.
It really speaks to the power of propaganda and how symbols can just be totally reinterpreted, you know?
Yeah.
The Nazis were masters at manipulating imagery and tapping into those existing cultural anxieties.
Right, so they basically just co-opted the swastika and made it the emblem of their whole movement.
Exactly. And they didn't just adopt any old swastika. They created a very specific design for their flag. So it was a black swastika tilted at 45 degrees, set against a white circle on a red background.
Yeah, I can picture it perfectly. Stark, bold, and unfortunately very effective at grabbing your attention.
It was. I mean, think about it. Flags, uniforms, propaganda posters.
Yeah.
The swastika was this constant reminder of the Nazi Party's grip on power.
Yeah.
It symbolized their ideology of racial superiority and their persecution of anyone that they deemed undesirable.
And this is where the swastika story takes its darkest turn, with World War II and the Holocaust.
Yes, the swastika became inextricably linked to the horrors of that period. You know, unimaginable cruelty, genocide, the loss of millions of lives. The trauma is so deep that it's hard to even separate the symbol from the atrocities committed under its banner.
It's totally understandable why there's such strong feelings about the swastika, especially in the West.
Right.
And why there are legal restrictions surrounding its use in a lot of countries.
Absolutely. Those restrictions and the stigma attached to the swastika are a direct result of what the Nazi Party did.
Right.
It serves as a stark reminder of some of the darkest chapters in human history.
So here we are today, grappling with this incredibly complex legacy. I mean, for so many, the swastika is just a symbol of hate. But then for others, particularly in Asia, it still represents something positive. So how do we reconcile these vastly different interpretations?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Recognizing the swastika's ancient and diverse history, but then also acknowledging the pain and suffering that it represents to so many people.
It's a really delicate balance. It feels like there's this tension between honoring the victims of those Nazi atrocities and also acknowledging the swastika's pre-Nazi history.
It is, and some Hindu, Buddhist, even Native American groups are actually trying to reclaim the swastika's original meaning, you know, emphasizing its connection to peace, well-being, spirituality. But it's a really difficult and often controversial effort.
I can imagine. How are they going about doing that?
Yeah, well, a lot of it comes down to education and just having these open dialogues. They really want people to understand that the swastika has this long and rich history that goes way beyond its association with Nazism. They're working to raise awareness of its diverse interpretations and how important context is.
I've even heard some people suggest using different terms to help differentiate the ancient symbol from the Nazi version.
Right.
Like using swastika for the ancient symbol and then Hakenkreuz, which is the German word, for the Nazi symbol.
Right.
Do you think that's helpful at all?
You know, it's definitely a strategy that some people find useful, but it's certainly a subject of debate. I think ultimately the most important thing is to just consider the context.
The context in which the symbol is being used.
Yeah, like where you see it and who's using it, you know? Seeing a swastika on a Buddhist temple is very different from seeing it on, like, a neo-Nazi website, for example.
Right.
The intent behind its use is key.
It's a lot to think about. It seems like understanding the swastika's complex history is essential if we even want to have a meaningful conversation about how it's used today.
It really is. The swastika isn't just a symbol, it's a reflection of our collective history and the enduring power that symbols have to shape our worldviews.
Wow. We've covered so much ground here. From ancient origins to modern controversy, the swastika's journey is a testament to the power of symbols and how they can be interpreted and reinterpreted over time. What stands out to you the most about the swastika's legacy?
I think what's most striking is how the swastika has this ability to evoke such strong and contrasting emotions. For some, it represents hope, good fortune, and spirituality. But then for others, it's this chilling reminder of hate, violence, and genocide. The swastika forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about our past.
Yeah.
And to really grapple with the enduring legacy of symbols.
It's definitely a symbol that kind of stays with you long after you've seen it. We've talked about these attempts to reclaim the swastika and educate people about its pre-Nazi history. Yeah. But can a symbol truly be reclaimed after being so thoroughly tarnished by hate? Or will that shadow of its darkest chapter always linger? That's a really tough question. Can we ever separate a symbol from its darkest chapter?
It's definitely a challenge, and it's not just something we see with the swastika. Think about the Confederate flag here in the United States.
Yeah, that's another symbol that has a lot of baggage.
For sure. The question of reclamation really comes down to who gets to define a symbol's meaning and then how we navigate those competing interpretations.
Yeah.
You know, how do we balance remembering the past with the possibility of reinterpreting a symbol in the future?
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope. You want to honor the victims of Nazi atrocities, but we also don't want to erase the swastika's long and diverse pre-Nazi history.
I think education is just so crucial here.
Yeah.
You know, understanding the swastika's full history, both the positive and the negative aspects of it, is essential to having these informed discussions about its use today.
So it's not about, like, erasing the swastika from existence, but about understanding its nuances and being sensitive to those different meanings that it holds across cultures.
Yeah. It's about being mindful of, like, the weight of history while also recognizing its ongoing significance in other parts of the world.
Man, we have gone deep on this one. From its ancient origins to its modern controversies, the swastika's journey really highlights how powerful symbols can be and how their meanings can shift over time.
It really does. The swastika is a symbol that forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about history, about culture, and about the ways in which symbols can be both unifying and divisive.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of the swastika and all its complexities now.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I think the most important takeaway from all of this is just recognizing that symbols don't exist in a vacuum. Their meanings are constantly evolving. They're shaped by the contexts in which they're used, by the people who are interpreting them. So as you continue to encounter the swastika, remember its complexities, ask questions, and keep striving for understanding.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. And for our listeners, thank you for being here.